last topic, but not the least important. It's a very important for a critical care physician. Uh, Trauma. So Dr. Annapurna, senior consultant and associate professor of Kamineni Hospital in the radiology department, will guide us to guide us to know the details of trauma radiology. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to all of you. I've been given this very difficult task of standing between you and lunch, and the two with the topic of trauma. So I just hope I can, captivate your attention. I'll be dealing with trauma from head to toe. Mostly the main organs will be dealt with, and I'm skipping the extremity trauma because that is most of the time done by the ortho people. So what is the role of imaging in trauma? The role of imaging is basically to help the clinician decide whether the patient has to go for a conservative management or has to be taken up immediately for surgery. That is the first thing. The second thing is for anticipating the complications. That is, if suppose the patient has certain findings, does he have to have a follow-up scan? How often should he be observed? Or can you discharge him? So these are the two important roles which the radiologist plays. So if you look at trauma setting, what you need to know is that you can divide it into three stages. The pre-investigative, where the role of the clinician is very important. Then the investigative, where the radiologist comes into play. And the post-investigative, where both the radiologist and clinician will take a decision together. So in the pre-investigative, you will have to decide when and where the investigations should be done. So in cases of trauma, once the patient has been stabilized, you most of the time you have a DR, that is a digital radiography unit, which can be shifted bedside. So if the patient is breathless, you can do an X-ray chest immediately. And then you have the fast abdominal scans, where you do the ultrasound examination of the abdomen to look for any fluid within the abdominal cavity which might suggest a hemoperitoneum. So these are all which are done in the bedside once the patient has been stabilized and you want to make a quick diagnosis. And if suppose you find something abnormal, what is it that you need to do? You need to send the patient back to the next imaging modality. So by and far, for a trauma case, CT scan is the modality of choice. Is it with contrast or without contrast will depend upon what organ that you are imaging. Then you will have to, the clinician will decide what are the indications for imaging. So what are the indications of, say, that we'll deal with as we go to each organ. Like if, say, in cases of head trauma, where are the findings where you will go for a CT scan or where you will just observe the patient. And most importantly, the mechanism of injury is very important, because there might be high velocity trauma where the patient might be stable initially but will deteriorate later. There might be cases where you have blunt injury to the abdomen. The patient will be quite stable once he comes to the EMD. And if suppose he says, I'm fine, I want to go home, and without anything he goes home, he might present back within a couple of hours with abdominal distension and pain also in shock. So investigative, as we have seen, the modality of choice is CT. Why is CT so important? Because it is something which is easily available and that which is fast, and it gives us a very good accuracy in diagnosing the conditions. Then radiology report and its implications. So just like now, as it is a scenario where you all want to have lunch and then trauma is coming in between. So this is a case where you have trauma patients presenting when your shift is over, or when, midnight, when you're just back from a second show movie. And what you need to do is make sure that it's not just the resident who has seen the CT images, but you take an opinion of a consultant, at least within the first half an hour to 1 hour. Okay? Then you should know what are the pearls and pitfalls. That is, what are the conditions which are easily missed, even by an experienced radiologist. And what are the things which can simulate a trauma. Then post-investigative treatment decisions, follow-up scans are the post-investigative. So coming to the first major, head trauma. So this is a very busy slide. So if you see in what are the indications for immediate CT in cases of head trauma, so this box will tell us what are the indications for immediate CT in head trauma. That is when the GCS is less than 13 on initial assessment and you have GCS less than 15 at 2 hours, when the patient has some post-amnesia, post-traumatic seizures, there is bleeding from the nose, bleeding from the ear. So all these will indicate that there is a major trauma to the head and that it has to be evaluated with a CT. So all these, the patient goes for CT immediately. If suppose the patient does not have any of these findings and if the patient is on warfarin or if the patient has some high risk factors like an elderly patient or the patient is under the influence of alcohol or substance abuse, all these are high risk patients whom you have to keep them under observation and do a CT scan at 8 hours after the trauma, and then if there is no pathology found, you can send the patient home. So coming to the types of head injury, what are the things you can expect in a head injury? Yep. So if you look at the brain, you will divide the brain into two, intra-axial and extra-axial compartments. So the intra-axial compartments will be the brain parenchyma and the ventricular system. The extra-axial compartments are the covering of the brain, that is the dura, the arachnoid and the pia matters, and also the scalp and the bony cage. So the bones which you see here, these are the extra-axial. So the types of head injury could be primary brain injury, which is a direct result of trauma. So that could be extra-axial collections, intra-axial injuries, vascular injuries like dissections, or scalp injuries and fractures. Whereas secondary injuries are those which are complications of the primary injury. That is, if you have a hemorrhage which is resulting in herniations and infarcts. These are all secondary injuries. That is herniations, infarctions, cerebral edema secondary to trauma, and some of the late complications. So what are the extra-axial collections that you encounter? The first one is the EDH, that is extradural hemorrhage, which will be in between the dura mater and the bone, isn't it? The dura is attached very strongly to the inner layer of the skull. So once it is stripped, which is usually because of arterial injuries of middle meningeal artery, you will have the extradural collection, which will be a biconvex collection and does not cross the sutures. The subdural collections, on the other hand, are concavo-convex, like so, and they will cross the sutures and usually are of the venous nature. Okay? So why is it so important to differentiate between extra and subdural collections? Anyone? The plan of management, in the sense, in extradural collections, mannitol is contraindicated, because once you give anything which will decrease the edema in the brain, there will be stripping of the dura further and there is a chance that the extradural collection will increase. Okay, so that is why the neurosurgeon keeps asking whether it is an extradural or a subdural hemorrhage. So this is the subdural hemorrhage. Then you can have hemorrhage along the tentorial leaves, then hemorrhage within the sulcal spaces, and this is the subarachnoid hemorrhage. You can have hemorrhage into the ventricular system. Usually the ventricular system hemorrhages will be because the parenchymal hematomas which have ruptured into the ventricles, or it could be because of the subarachnoid hemorrhage which has seeped back into the ventricles. Then is one important thing you need to tell the clinician is whether there is an ongoing bleed. So what is an ongoing bleed? Ongoing is a hyperacute or a rebleed. So you have usually acute hemorrhages we know are hyperdense, isn't it? So you have these dense collections and within them you have certain areas of decreased density, which indicates that there is active leak of blood into the collection. So that means there is a vessel which has to be dealt with. If not, you will have an increase in the hemorrhagic collection. So hyperacute or rebleeds are where you have the swirl sign. That is where there are decreased densities within the hyperdense collections. Coming to intra-axial bleeds, they can be most commonly cerebral contusions. Contusions usually will occur where the brain is in close contact with the bone, isn't it? Like temporal or frontal regions, where the brain, because of the deceleration or acceleration injuries, the brain will hit into the inner aspect of the bony projections of the skull. They will be hemorrhage within the parenchyma, and you will have bleed with edema. So that is typical. So that's about hyperacute or rebleeds. Then intraaxial, we have seen hemorrhagic contusions like so, or you can have intraparenchymal hematomas where the small perforating arteries might rupture because of the injury and result in intraparenchymal hematomas. Then one thing which is very important is diffuse axonal injuries. So diffuse axonal injuries are where you have, these are usually small shear injuries. That is, when you have high impact injuries, you have acceleration and deceleration forces, you will have tiny arterioles which are rupturing at the gray white matter junctions like so, or in the corpus callosum. Okay? So these are the diffuse axonal injuries or shear injuries. The importance is that if suppose the patient does not have any major bleed, even then if you have a diffuse axonal injury, the patient can present with altered orientation, or the patient can also go into coma if the axonal injuries are within the midbrain. Okay? So that is why sometimes when you do not see axonal injuries in a CT, and if there is a clinical suspicion where the CT is not accounting for the coma scale or the orientation of the patient, the surgeon will order an MRI. MRI is very sensitive in assessing diffuse axonal injuries, which you can see as small pinpoint areas of these black spots, that is hypointense areas within either the midbrain, the corpus callosum, or at the gray white junctions where this is a diffusion weighted image. So you can see this white one here, or these are the gradient images which will pick up hemorrhage easily. So these are the that is the role of MRI. A patient who is otherwise preserved, if suddenly there is a deterioration which the CT cannot account for, then there is a role for MR in such cases. Then secondary injuries are herniations, where you can have transtentorial herniation. So transtentorial is where the superior part, the part of the brain which is above the tentorium, is trying to come down. So that will usually be the uncus and the temporal lobe areas. So you can have transtentorial herniations. Here you can see that the suprasellar cistern is obliterated. Then subfalcine hemorrhages, where you will have the cingulate gyrus which is going on to the contralateral side because of hemorrhage like so, subfalcine herniation. Then uncal herniations, where not much of temporal lobe but just the uncus is herniating. Then you will have, in cases of increased edema, tonsillar herniations and also compression over the midbrain and the medulla, which has to be dealt with immediately. Then coming to infarctions, again whenever you have herniations, you will have compression over the vessel. So in cases of transtentorial, you can have compression over the PCA, in subfalcine over the ACA, and because of this compression you can have infarctions like so. This is an MCA infarct, and here what you are seeing is the white cerebellar sign, that is the cerebellum is the one which is preserved, rest of the brain is all edematous and infarcted. Then PCA infarct, you can see an infarct in the thalamus. So coming to the fractures, they can be undisplaced fractures like so. You can have displaced fracture. So what is the importance is, if suppose the displacement of the bony fragment is more than that of the diploic space, then that fracture has to be attended to. If it's an undisplaced fracture, there is no role for the neurosurgeon to open. You can have comminuted fractures like so. Then what is important is, sometimes you see the CT brain in a hurry, you always ask if the patient has had nasal bleed or bleed within the ear, because you know where to look for. So you can see that there is a fracture of the petrous temporal bone with hemorrhage within the middle ear cavity. And sometimes when it is difficult for you to see where the fracture is, go by the air. If suppose you have any fracture passing through the mastoids or passing through the sinuses, usually the air will leak into the extraaxial spaces of the brain and you get a pneumocephaly. So that could be a clue to look for fractures. So pearls and pitfalls, like you see this case, if you see immediately, you will not be able to really diagnose where the problem is, especially if you are in a hurry and you want to go home. Next, look at the bone window. You see even small undisplaced fracture here. So what do? You change the window setting and you can see a small EDH which is sitting here. And if you appreciate, even in the first one, you could see a scalp hematoma. So what is important is to always look at places where you have scalp hematoma or fractures. Look for mechanisms of coup and counter-coup injuries. Coup are directly affected. Counter-coup are in the opposite sides of the brain. Like contusions and SDHs are all counter-coup injuries. Whereas coup injuries are the ones which are directly related to trauma. Then sometimes SAH can be very subtle. You can see just small hyperdensities here. So you have to be very careful, change the window settings and look for SAH. Whereas here it is quite obvious. Then subacute SDHs, that is if the patient presents little later after the trauma, you can see that the SDH will decrease in density and looks very similar to that of the brain parenchyma. So what you need to look for is the buckling of the brain parenchyma. Then what is the role of MR in hemorrhage? If suppose there are very subtle findings which could not be picked up on CT, you can do an MR where the fluid attenuated images will give you the a proper SDH as here with again contusions. This is the gradient image where you can see multiple hemorrhages within the parenchyma. So another thing you need to know is it really trauma? Because sometimes what happens, the patient is going on a bike and suddenly he falls and then they get him to the EMD and say that it is a injury or an accident. But what actually happened was that you have a subarachnoid hemorrhage mainly in the basal cisterns because of an ACOM aneurysm. Or you can have a hypertensive who has had a fall. So that's not trauma. That is because of the intraparenchymal hematoma that he has had the fall. So trauma is not the primary setting in such cases. So again, spinal trauma. What are the indications of imaging in spinal trauma? So indications would be if there is a high impact injury, okay, and then if he has spinal tenderness, neurological deficits, all these are the indications for spinal trauma imaging. What is the modality of choice? It is CT. Again, CT is the modality of choice because whenever you're taking a patient for trauma, you're anyway doing head, chest and abdomen. In that you will cover off spine because all you have to do is change the window setting, look in sagittal, axial and coronal images. So basically for that you need to know the spinal anatomy. You have basically what we want to do here is to know whether it is a stable fracture or an unstable fracture where the patient has to be, the spine has to be fixed. Okay. So you will have to look at this is the anterior spinal line. You will have the posterior spinal, the spinolaminar and the interspinous. So these are the distances which you need to know. So the anterior longitudinal ligament, posterior longitudinal ligament, then you have the ligamentum flavum, the supraspinous and the interspinous ligaments. So these basically give the stability to the spine. So a rupture of a ligament will mean that the spine or the vertebrae will move over one another. If not now, then maybe later. Because initially, because of this muscle spasm, they can still be in place. But later, once the patient thinks there's nothing and he starts moving about, you can have these listhesis occurring. So hanged man fractures are, these are hyperextension injuries to the, they are spondylolisthesis injuries, and these become, the ones which are important are when you have listhesis, that is the vertebrae move one over the other, the facet joints will move anteriorly and get locked. So that is where you need to intervene. Then Jefferson's fracture are the axial loading fractures of C1. Then fractures of the dens. So usually what happens is when you do a cervical spine X-ray, you try to pull the shoulder down and look till C7. But even then the sensitivity of detecting will be very low because of the so many things, patient's position, maybe how the radiograph has been taken. CT is a foolproof method. If you see here, this is an MR image. What you can see is that there is a fracture through the dens, which is also going into the body of the dens of the C2 vertebra. So those which involve the base of the dens have to be dealt with and not the others because they are more unstable. Then, as I have said, you can have listhesis of the vertebra. You can see here there is a disc injury and the vertebra has slid over the lower vertebra. Okay, there is a disc injury, there is rupture of the posterior longitudinal ligament. What you are seeing is all these hyperintensities in the posterior part, the supraspinous and interspinous ligaments, which means that it's an unstable fracture. And the facet has moved forward and it has locked itself, the superior facet here has moved forward and it has locked itself with the inferior facet. Okay? Chopsticks fractures will occur when you have ankylosing spondylitis, where a trivial trauma can result in very irregular fractures and they do not really heed the normal rules. So you can have it any way you want because it is a totally fixed spine. And when you have chopstick fractures, always look for fractures elsewhere in the vertebral column. So this was a case of DISH, that is diffuse hyperostosis, and you have fractures here. Then apart from that, you have wedge fractures, which are in thoracolumbar. You have wedge fractures where only the anterior column is involved. So these are more or less stable fractures. Okay, so you have only the superior end plate which is fractured and there is mild anterior wedging like so. This is a total collapse in cases of osteoporosis. The same thing on a CT, you can see that the body of the vertebra posterior cortex is preserved. Okay, and you have the disc protruding into the fractured fragment, which is showing edema on a fat suppressed image. So wedge compression fractures are more or less stable. Burst fractures is when you have an injury where the middle and the posterior spinal columns are also involved. So you can see that the posterior cortex has buckled. Okay, and there is comminuted fracture of the vertebra. There is movement or angulation of the vertebra which will have pressure over the spinal cord, and you will have injuries to the spinous ligaments, which means that it is an unstable fracture like so. You can see that the posterior body has buckled and you can see compression over the cord. So the role of MR imaging will be mainly to look for cord compressions, the posterior spinal ligamental, if they are intact or not, and also to look for any epidural hemorrhages or collections which can result in cord compression. So cord injuries can be just edema because the fractured fragment is hit on the cord, which will be seen as hyperintensity, or it could be total cord transactions, like here you have a grade 4 listhesis. Then MR plays a role in brachial plexus injuries, but these are not something which you do in acute settings. These are done much later, after you have dealt with the patient as a whole, and once the patient has any weakness in the upper limb. So case where the root has avulsed and you see the pseudomeningoceles, and also the cords are all hyperintense. That means they are contused. Then volume rendered images have a major role, especially in knowing bone fractures like sacral fracture here or the acetabular fractures. This is a bone window. Abdominal trauma, again, indications of imaging is where you have high impact injuries, fluid on fast, patient has got guarding, and you have bruising over the abdomen. What is the modality of choice? CT, contrast CT. So contrast or no contrast? Always, any case of abdominal injury, always give IV contrast. Oral contrast is not necessary. But IV contrast is necessary because it will help us make so many more diagnoses. Only in cases where, the surgeon just wants to confirm that there is pneumoperitoneum, that is the only point where you do a plain CT. But trauma CT by and far is a contrast CT. Contrast is a must for a CT of the trauma cases. Special situations. So if suppose you do not have creatinine levels, will you still give contrast? Yes, you will give, because the risk benefit ratio you'll have to see. If the patient is young, okay, and if the patient has had trauma, you're not expecting some renal conditions, isn't it? And you're gaining more by giving contrast rather than doing a plain CT. How about pregnant ladies? If suppose a pregnant lady has been injured, will you give contrast? Yes? MR will not help you detect anything. MR, for one sequence of MR, it will take 4 to 5 minutes. So if you want to get a total MR, it will be half an hour. Okay? So in cases of pregnancy also, if the risk benefit ratio, if the benefit to the patient is more, you do give contrast. And you will explain to the patient that it might have some effects on the baby. But without contrast, there is no point in doing a CT. Okay? In cases of CKD, if suppose a patient is there who is like a known case of renal failure, will you give contrast in cases of trauma? You will. Because maybe after that, maybe they'll dialyze, or the benefit of giving contrast is more. So a contrast CT is a must when you're doing a trauma for abdomen. So you have various injuries of solid organs. You will have contusions, hematomas and lacerations. Lacerations are where the organ just gets torn. Okay? So you will have linear, non-enhancing lesions like so within the parenchyma, and you will look at whether how far is it going to involve the major vessels, whichever organ that you're looking at. So these are the subcapsular hematomas and some areas of decreased or heterogeneous enhancement which are contusions. So you can have lacerations, subcapsular hematomas and contusions, or sometimes when a vessel is injured, you can have areas of infarction where that particular part of the organ will not enhance. So depending upon what you are seeing, there is a grading. What is important is for any solid abdominal organ injury, what you need to do is to tell whether there is vascular injury. That is, the vascular pedicle has been injured. Is there active contrast extravasations? Because these are the conditions where the patient has to be immediately taken, either radiographically angio, you use an angio and you embolize the vessel, or they have to do a splenectomy or remove a part of the lobe. So what is a giveaway? Giveaway is like if you have fractures of, say, right-sided ribs, think of liver injuries. Look for liver injuries. If you have it on the left, look for splenic injuries. Okay? So you have this subcapsular hematoma, and what you can see is active contrast extravasation. So more and more cases of blunt injury abdomens are being taken up for CT, and we are doing angiophases to look for vessel injuries. Okay? Spleen, similarly, you will have splenic lacerations, active contrast extravasations, subcapsular hematoma like so, and again here there is a extravasation of contrast. So when there is active contrast extravasation, it means the patient should not be managed conservatively because he is more likely to keep bleeding. So the bleeder has to be dealt with. So same thing, I will not go through this. Renal injuries, again, you will have lacerations. What is important is that you can have devascularization injuries of the kidney. That is, you can have a dissection of the renal artery or a thrombus of the renal artery, which will result in complete devascularization or infarction of the kidney. Then when you're looking for renal trauma, always look for delayed images to see if there is any extravasation of contrast from the pelvic ileal system, which indicates that there is an injury to the pelvis. And what you are seeing is here, the pelvis, the contrast is coming out of the renal pelvis. Then bladder, I've just added here, you can have extraperitoneal or intraperitoneal ruptures, which are more common. When do you get extraperitoneal ruptures? Usually these are the ones which are associated with fractures, where the contrast is leaking into the extraperitoneal pelvic spaces. Intraperitoneal ruptures occur when you have trauma to a full bladder, where you will have contrast within the peritoneal spaces, within it will keep insinuating between the bowel. So this is a case of extraperitoneal bladder rupture. Again, delayed images you have to take, and you will have, because you can have fluid which is leaking into the scrotum, leaking into the medial aspects of the thigh, wherever it is communicating with the extraperitoneal pelvic spaces, and these are usually associated with pelvic fractures. So bowel wall injuries, the ones which we need to remember are whenever there are complete seromuscular tears, when there is devascularized bowel, when there is active mesenteric bleeding, and mesenteric injury which is associated with bowel ischemia, the patient has to be taken up immediately for surgery. Okay. So mechanisms, blunt penetrating iatrogenic. So blunt injuries can be deceleration injuries. So usually the bowel will, the mesentery tears at the points where it is attached and will result in ischemia. So they are the ligament of Treves, the IC junction and sigmoid colon. So for the example, this was a case. It was a 39-year-old traveling in a car which was hit by a truck. So what you can see is that the terminal ileum, there is near transection. You will have gangrene where it is not enhancing at all, and the tear in the sigmoid mesentery. Here again, you can see that there is extraluminal air. There is a tear in the bowel and you have pneumoperitoneum. Burst injuries will be in the antimesenteric borders, like so. Then crush injuries, what is the sign? Seat belt sign. So whenever you see such type of injuries, look for all the organs which are in close contact with the vertebral body. So duodenum, pancreas and bowel. All are these are the ones you should look for. Like in this case, you have a pancreatic transections, okay, where the pancreas has been transected. You have thickening of jejunum and ileal loops. This case actually, he had also an extensive injury to the chest with aortic injury, and we couldn't really save him. Then how do you look for pneumoperitoneum? I think you've dealt with this since morning. So you will have a continuous diaphragm sign. Then they've already told you Rigler's sign. Then you have air under domes of diaphragm. So how important is, so what type of a radiograph do you want to look for a pneumoperitoneum? Erect abdomen. So in cases of trauma, will you be able to make the patient stand for that long? So how can you improve it? What is the other view you can take? Decubitus, isn't it? When you take a lateral decubitus with the liver right side up, you will try to look for air within the, traveling along the edge of the liver. So because in a trauma case you can't make him stand for long, you do a lateral decubitus. But then the sensitivity of a conventional radiograph is very less. So if it is there, fine. If it is not there, that doesn't mean that there is no pneumoperitoneum. So on CT, you will see all these where you have extraluminal air in the mesentery. Sometimes where you find the air, you can tell as to what is the viscera which has ruptured, isn't it? If suppose it is somewhere near the gastrohepatic ligaments, you will think in terms of duodenum or a stomach. Near the sigmoid mesocolon, you will think in terms of a sigmoid rupture. Okay? Then hemoperitoneum is where you have, this is a non-enhanced images, that is plain images, initial images. What you can see is that the fluid is very similar to that of the adjacent organs. So that means the density is more. It indicates that it is a hemoperitoneum. So you can have diaphragmatic ruptures because of blunt injuries. Then pearls and pitfalls. Mechanism of bowel injury is very important. Mechanism of injury is important so that you know where to look for. Then you need to do meticulous organized reading of images. The signs of bowel injury can be direct, indirect. Then you can have pseudo-pneumoperitoneum like so, where you can see these pockets of air. Don't confuse them with intraperitoneal air. They are within the extraperitoneal spaces. Also look for, like, so this was a case. He was a 45-year-old male. He was hit by a lorry. What you can see that he already had an umbilical large incisional hernia, and the bowel which was there within the hernia had actually ruptured. So if you do not have air within the peritoneum, look for the hernial sides too. If suppose the patient has had an inguinal hernia, look for air within the inguinal hernia, because those are the cases where you can miss. So chest trauma, again indications would be breathlessness, high impact injuries. Modality of choice, initially what do? A chest radiograph. Then CT, plain contrast, contrast, always contrast. Trauma CT means contrast of IV, giving IV contrast with no oral contrast. You are doing CT chest and abdomen. So one thing I forgot to tell you, in when you're doing head trauma, do you give contrast or no? CT. Yes, no? No, because what you're trying to detect is a bright blood. You give contrast, vessels will enhance and you will not be able to see blood. You will be confused. Okay? So CT brain is always plain. CT chest abdomen is contrast. So modality of choice is again CT. Contrast, no contrast, we've already answered that. So in plain radiographs you will see pneumothorax, and what happens is when the patient, usually you cannot put him erect. Sometimes in AP views, how do you detect air? You've already seen this, no? What is this sign? Deep sulcus sign. So always think in terms of a pneumothorax when you have a deep sulcus sign. You can sometimes look for tension pneumothorax, where you have, there is lot of pneumothorax, contralateral shift of the mediastinum, and you will have flattening of the diaphragm. It requires immediate attention. Then pneumomediastinum, you can see air along the aorta here, isn't it? Same case, you have it along the aorta in the mediastinum, have a pneumothorax around the aorta. Then pulmonary injuries can be pulmonary contusions, where you will have, usually they'll be on the surface. Contusions are something which will always occur on the surface of an organ, where it is in contact with the bone, because the organ is hit against the bone, and you will have rupture of the small arteries or arterioles there, and you'll have bleeding within the organ, like pulmonary contusions. Sometimes pulmonary contusions are very, very difficult. Actually, chest AP views that we take in emergency, they are more or less they are very less sensitive to picking up findings. You can still have contusions and it might not show on a chest radiograph. Okay, so these are pulmonary contusions where you have them at the surface. This is a pneumo that you are seeing. Then lacerations is when there is a tear, you will have a cavity being formed and you have blood filling up the whole of the cavity. Okay, so pulmonary lacerations. So you have a blood-filled cavity. These are all contusions. So when do you suspect a bronchopleural fistula? Bronchopleural fistula. You can suspect a bronchopleural fistula when you have a pneumo, you have put in a chest drain and still the pneumo is not going down, isn't it? So that means that there's something which is continuously feeding the pleural cavity with air. And what is that? It's a bronchopleural fistula. So that is more or less an indirect diagnosis. Flail chest is where you have multiple multi-segmented contiguous rib fractures and you have paradoxical movement of the chest wall. These people can go very easily into pneumo. Then vascular injuries, you can have traumatic aortic dissections. That is why it is so important to give contrast. Okay, when you give contrast, you take an angiofilm. That is the initial arterial film. You can look for aortic dissections. Then you can have small rents or ruptures within the aorta which has been sealed off. So a pseudoaneurysm type of picture. So look for whenever they are doing a CT, you will look not just at the organs but also at the vessels, the pattern of enhancement. So penetrating injuries can be like, see, this was a case just to include with an arterial. He had a penetrating injury to the groin. Okay, what you can see is that the contrast is coming out of the superficial femoral artery here, and this is a case of pseudoaneurysm because of penetrating injury. So basically in my talk what I wanted to tell you was that the mechanism of injury is very important. So just by sending a patient and saying okay the radiologist will do the rest, that doesn't do. Go and talk to the radiologist, and if suppose there's something which you can add and say okay he had something like this, our surgeon always does that. He comes and says madam, have you seen pancreas, this was a blunt injury. So just go talk to the radiologist, give some input such that the reports are better. Then as we have said, CT is the modality of choice for trauma, especially for chest and abdomen. You always do contrast CTs. Methodical meticulous survey of images is very important. Okay, imaging findings suggestive of active bleed, bowel injuries, unstable fractures warrant surgical management, and late presentation of injuries is something you need to keep in mind. Like secondary injuries to the brain, you have to observe and follow up, do follow up imaging in such cases. So any case of a hemorrhagic contusion which they are not going to take up or they are not going to decompress, what they are going to do is they are going to repeat the CT within 2 to 3 hours or 6 hours at least to look for any progression in the hemorrhage. Usually what happens, hemorrhagic contusions in the brain, once it evolves, the hemorrhagic component goes down but the edema component increases. So you will have more of herniations happening later on than initially. Okay, so always keep in mind and observe the patient. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Annapurna. Very elaborative and very clear. Many of us understood when to use proper imaging, and contrast studies are not commonly done, but to get the more information correctly we need to do contrast study. So first you do CT brain if the polytrauma plane, then you may do contrast to whole survey of the body. So thank you very much, Dr. Annapurna, for coming over here on the Sunday. Thank you very much again, and we'll break for lunch. Before that, I will invite my close friend, my classmate, Dr. Raja, to present the certificate.